shock attack on the former leader of Japan, Shinzo Abe, and of course his death. Now we're going to turn back to Sri Lanka and the protests that are taking place right now on the streets. Thousands of protesters have stormed the residence of the Sri Lankan President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. This is the residency there where protesters have got access. Police had fired shots in the air, but they couldn't stop the crowds from overrunning this residence. In a further development, the country's Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has agreed to resign. This is according to comments made by his office. They say that he will be resigning in order to make way for an all-party government. So a lot of developments taking place within Sri Lanka. We can cross over to speak to Dr. Ram Manikkalingam. He's founder and director of the Dialogue Advisory Group. You're also an ex-advisor to the former Sri Lankan President, Kumaratunga. It's good of you to join us at this very crucial moment for Sri Lanka. Are we seeing a complete turning point? Is there any return, or is this it? Does the president, we're hearing the Prime Minister is willing to resign, the president surely has to go?
The president has to go. In a way, the president has already gone. It doesn't really matter what he says. He's now become irrelevant. We hear he's hiding out at an army camp somewhere in the suburbs of Colombo. And so I think your question about a turning point, yes, this is a turning point, and there is no return back. And the Rajapaksas are permanently finished with that. And we also hope that a corrupt class of politicians who took over the country and treated it like it was their fiefdom are also finished with this, dare I say, revolution.
I want to just help us to understand how we got to this moment. This hasn't happened overnight. People have been talking about their inability to get food, to get fuel for such a long time now. And now we are at this moment for Sri Lanka with people so angry. They've stormed both the Prime Minister and the President's residence. How did we get here?
Well, we got here because of sheer incompetence, mismanagement, and greed. And the Rajapaksa family embodied that. They embodied three things that have brought Sri Lanka down. The first is authoritarianism, the second is corruption, and the third is ethnic chauvinism. And all of this came to a head when Gotabaya Rajapaksa became president. He was a military man. He had no competence in administration or governance. And this showed in the last 3 years when he had his head in the sand and did not acknowledge the fundamental problem that we had no more money in the bank. He should have gone, for example, to the IMF and to others much earlier, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to begin renegotiating our debt and to find a way out. Instead, he waited till the very end, to the point where today we have no food, no fuel, no medicine.
How do the next leadership group, how do you even begin unpicking this? You are, as a former advisor to a Sri Lankan president, to President Kumaratunga, if this had been when you were in that situation, what would you be advising future leaders of Sri Lanka to get the situation back to normal? Ultimately, as you're saying, people need food.
I think the first step would be to form a temporary government, what I would call an interim government. According to our constitution, the speaker will act as interim president till there's an election of a new president. And there are probably two names that would be ideal for president. One would be the leader of the opposition, Sajit Premadasa. The other name that is being used and mentioned these days is Mr. Sumandran, who is the leader of the Tamil party in parliament, the Tamil National Alliance. And it's really, you can understand the extent to which Sri Lanka has changed, that people are talking about a Tamil as a potential prime minister and president of Sri Lanka because they're looking for a corrupt and clean leadership. Once we've appointed a president, we then need to appoint a prime minister. And I think what we will have is an interim all-party government. And that government will do three things. One is begin the process of holding an election, which we should hold within 6 months to maximum a year. Begin negotiations with the IMF and also our creditors to deal with the economic crisis, and change our constitution to make it more democratic. So this, I think, is the task ahead for us in the next 6 months to 1 year.
I just wonder then, but we don't have much time, so I will ask you just to briefly answer this. A big question, but just briefly, if you would. There were discussions with the Kremlin, with President Putin, about arranging the supply of fuel. Is that now something that should be stopped and Sri Lanka should be looking in a different direction when it comes to the international community? Briefly, if you would, sir.
Certainly. I think Sri Lanka will have to get fuel from where it can. And frankly, I think it is a bit much for Europeans and others to ask Sri Lanka not to get fuel where it can when Europe gets gas and fuel from Russia and other countries too. So we will do that and we will work with Russia if we need to get our fuel. But I think the key issue here is that we create and establish a democratic government that is supported by the people and begin a transitional process.
Understood. Dr. Ram Manikkalingam, former advisor to Sri Lanka's President Kumaratunga, thank you so much for speaking to us on this historic day for Sri Lanka as we see the people out on the streets protesting, and we are continuing to monitor what is happening on the ground. Thanks for watching.